the Royal Blue podcast from the Liverpool ECHO.
Hello everybody and welcome to a very special edition of the Royal Blue podcast. The Doors, Jim Morrison once sung "This is the end" at the start of Apocalypse Now. Hopefully it's not the end for Gav and I, but it's the name of Gav's latest book, and it's the third in a trilogy of titles that Gav's written on Everton, and they're all pertinent to the time period in question. So Gav, perhaps for our younger viewers and listeners, The End. What's that all about? It's a fanzine, isn't it? At the time?
Yeah. So this is the third book and final book of John Morris's time at Everton, both as chairman and on the board, and then just sort of maybe not on the board, but still being hugely influential, and obviously the Littlewoods money. So the first book was Money Can't Buy Us Love, which hopefully doesn't need that explanation. That was about Everton, mostly in the 60s, what goes into the early 70s. The second one is Boys from the Blue Stuff, which hopefully doesn't need any introduction of the famous drama. It's a play on the title of that, and that's Everton, in the mid 70s to the mid 80s, and then the final one is The End, which didn't come from me. It came from Simon Hart, you may know about him.
Yeah, of course.
Everton journalist, and that's homage to the fanzine of around that's in the early 80s. It was still going during the currency of this book, though. So, and it's also The End in many different ways, because the title finishes in 93, 94, which is sadly when John Morris dies, when Littlewoods and the Morris family sell their shares, and also it's nearly the end for Everton. And obviously because it ends on the Wimbledon game and the aftermath of that. And it's also, I speak about this in the final chapter, Chris, it's the end in that, although the Premier League started in 1992, and people say, don't think football only starts in 1992. It didn't really start then. In the first couple of seasons of the Premier League, 92, 93, 93, 94, it just felt like an extension to the old First Division, just a different name, different trophy, watch it on Sky rather than on terrestrial TV. It was only the following year, which for doing next book, that starts when there's the fight for Blackburn and Man United for the title, that there's a new sort of narrative being written, and you had the Jurgen Klinsmann coming in, and things would change, and you had the rise of Newcastle, obviously under Kevin Keegan, and that felt like a new era. It started, the Premier League started then. Obviously, famously on the last day, they had both games live, the Blackburn and Man United games, and it was the first time it's ever been done. So that's when the Premier League started, I think. So calling it The End in 94 sort of covers a hell of a lot of things that finished in that season.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you say there, Gav, actually, because I remember obviously got a book myself coming out at the end of the season, Spirit of the Blues, obviously Goodison Park's greatest gains, Everton's most memorable matches, and I remember actually my research for that, Ken Rodgers' match report for the Everton's first ever Premier League game, 92-93 against Sheffield Wednesday. He doesn't even mention Premier League in the report. Like you're saying, it's almost like, okay, the refs are in green, but
and it finishes. So it seems like that. Yeah. And the irony being is, for Moores, is that in the early 60s, he was a great modernist. He wanted, built Everton, effectively the first modern football club in the early 60s. And he wanted to change the game, wanted to bring in foreign players. He saw, the way to it, a Super League, maybe like a Premier League in England. He was hugely influential within the game, but a lot of his ideas were blocked, and he would have looked on, I think, with the opportunity that the Premier League gave with embracing free market values, that in fact the Football League had stopped him in the early 60s. So that was another irony in it. So, and I talk about that a lot in the last chapter, how Moore's changed so much within the game and the way clubs are viewed, and his impact on Everton. And the irony that he dies in effectively the final season of the old Division 1. And he'd done so much to create that, the history in the previous 40 years. So the title is I say wide ranging.
So if we'll roughly try and go through this chronologically, the book starts at the end of 84-85 season, the most successful season in Everton's entire history. The club might have been primed to go on to even bigger and better things, but obviously there's a huge pivotal moment for Everton and English football and it involves the neighbours just a couple of weeks after Everton's greatest European triumph.
Yeah, I don't want to chapters on that because you're obliged to talk about it, and I talk about the impact on the club later on in the book. But I mean, I think there's a lot of revisionism around Heysel. You know, I still hear stuff that's just simply not true. And without going into too much detail, obviously Heysel happened and Liverpool fans, but to blame, and a crumbling stadium, and there was lots of other things, poor policing. But it was a lot of stuff that had gone on with English clubs over the years, and it was just the final, the straw that broke the camel's back with UEFA. And they banned English clubs. It wasn't Thatcher. People say Thatcher banned English clubs. No, it didn't. It was UEFA did. And that obviously impacted on Everton, come playing the European Cup. And I talk, as I say, throughout the book about how much at the same time did that influence, the way the club went. And I ultimately say, without giving too much away, that I think the whole thing about Heysel and its impact of Everton has been largely overstated. And to blame it on Liverpool seems a bit too convenient. And people say, the club, loads of players left to other states. Well, not really. I mean, 3 years after Heysel, all the team that played in the 5-0 against Man United in '84 was still at the club.
Right.
And that's and you know what it's like. Teams change. Yeah. Don't do. Teams operate in 3 or 4 year cycles. So I think people would have left anyway. I mean, Trevor Stevens was still there 4 years after Heysel in 1989, and Gary Stevens went for for other reasons. So that's a myth, and I like. And one of the things when I've done books over the years is there's a lot of myths around Everton and the football general that when you examine the evidence and look back at it, they're just not true. Yeah, and that's definitely one of them. It did impact on us. I think the European ban in that, I think a few people went stale because you couldn't, if you weren't winning titles, there's no European qualification to act, motivate you. And I think that can bring a bit of staleness, but it certainly didn't contribute to our decline, from the late 80s onwards. And I write about that at some length. I mean, people say how Howard went away to Bilbao because of the European ban. Well, Bilbao were in Europe.
Nice. And he couldn't even sign overseas players, of course.
Yeah, and he come back to Manchester City, who, with all due respect, we're never going to get in Europe. Yeah. There's lots of stuff like that in the book. I talk about that. And the Heysel thing is quite important because it sets the agenda thing for the rest of the book. And then we get into 85, 86, and we signed Lineker, don't we, in 85. But I think the problem with Howard in 85, 86, if you're champions, you're there to be shot at, aren't you, really? And I think we struggle. I think early on in the season we struggled with that. We had some horrendous injuries as well. And then we know what happened at the end of that campaign, don't we? And so 85, 86 was, I thought we did great just to stay in the game because Reid was out most of the season. Mountford was out most of the season. Southall was out from March. So we were 8 points ahead of Liverpool in February. And I do criticise Howard a little bit in the book that I felt at the end of that season. He was too conservative. I think we took our eye off Liverpool a bit on their run. And I think they always thought we've got a game in hand. Win that and we'll win the title. But we then got beat at Oxford. Yeah. And then you're playing a high stakes game and that cost us. And so that was a frustrating campaign, but I thought we did really well, given our injuries and stuff, to stay in the fight. But we should have won the title. Really, I think Howard was a little bit too negative at the end of the season, and I think in the cup final as well, it was quite interesting, really, that we'd lost the league to Liverpool and we go to Wembley. And Liverpool are the favourites, edged slightly against Everton, into us. But, for 60 minutes, we're the better team, aren't we? We had Liverpool where we wanted them. And I speak about that last 30 minutes. It was quite painful in that. I think it wasn't Howard's best game as Everton manager. If you recall, he took Gary Stevens off after he effectively given the ball away to Ronnie Whelan for the first goal and brought Adrian Heath on. And that just, whole balance of the team's gone, and you've only got 3 men at the back. And we ended up playing Bracewell, I think, at the back, and we just outlawed Liverpool, for the momentum, and we ended up getting beaten. That was a game that was also winnable. If you remember the fight between Jim Beglin and Bruce Grobbelaar in the second half, and that was disappointing to lose. But the thing is, most people would count that as a great season, but because Liverpool won the title and the double, we look back on it now, don't we? Go, yeah, what might have been, and then they sell Lineker in the summer, and that was quite an interesting transfer, because he was. I think did that say that we're no longer a big club for selling Lineker?
Back of him getting the golden boot.
Yeah. So it was just that season was painful, but it was really interesting to write about.
Yeah. In terms of including myself in this one, and with Lineker, because obviously he was only there for the one season, scored about 40 goals in all competitions. But was that to a detriment to the team? I mean, it could have been so close. Everton could have won the double that season. As it turned out, Liverpool won the double for the only time in their history. But then, as we're going to come on to shortly, the goals get shared around a bit more the following year. I mean, just what was he like? Because of course, when he first came in, it was that huge controversy because he was replacing Andy Gray as well. Wasn't he?
So they were big shoes to follow. And in terms of a crowd please, you don't replace Gray, do you? Yeah. He's master of it. Lineker was a different type of player, and I totally get why people say, when you see Lineker's attributes over, and at that point in his career, I think he was a better player when he came back with Spurs, is, a lot of pace, and he was top class Lineker, absolutely top class striker. But again, this is one of these myths that get built up over time. I mean, if you see most of his goals for Everton, that was after all his guys, all 40 of his goals. They're not this myth about getting the ball from deep and then kicked over the back, over the defence. There's very few goals like that. Most of his goals were headers. I think five of his first six goals were headers, Lineker.
Right.
And I think out of 40, 13, 14 of them were headed goals. The type of stuff he would have scored in 84, 85. It was a different type of senses, I think. With Gray and when Sharp was playing in, it was like the high-hanging cross, for them to beat the centre-half. But Lineker, it tended to be quick crosses, from the byline and stuff. And Gary had great movements, certainly on the 6-yard box, and he'd nod them in. And it's a bit of a myth. And I think Peter Reid said, didn't he? He said that was a myth. He says, I can't recall a team talk off Howard where Howard said, right, this is what we're going to do.
Knock it over.
We're going to knock it over the top for Lineker. And Ronaldo said that didn't happen at all. We did sit deep because of Reid's injury. Because Reid was great getting us up the pitch. And I think about Reid out, we just naturally sat deeper. And, Reid's absence affected, say, Trevor Stephen, particularly because, Reid, he picked the ball off Trevor and then Trevor would move up the pitch and Reid would give him back. And I think that was one of the reasons, I think, why people have that impression, where some of it was down to injuries. But I don't think there was ever a strategy to say, let's just knock the ball long and get Gary to run onto it. But at the same time, I do think Howard said this in Lineker's, one of Lineker's biographies, his players become lazy when you've got a player to score loads of goals. You just think they're going to score the goals. Yeah. We'll just, let them do it and look for them when we've got the ball. And I think there's an element of that as well.
Yeah. Well, the following season, obviously, which remains the last league championship in Everton's history, whether that's going to remain the case forever, that's another day. But it was a triumph against adversity even back then.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. 86, 87 was, when you look at it, he was 23 players in 42 games. So it was a longer season. And no team wins titles with 23 players. And most of them played. It wasn't as if you got 10 who played one game, at the end of the season. It was 23. And a lot of them, won a title, winners medal, because they played the 10 games. And Howard, it was just it was just masterful display of man management by Howard and how he used resources. I'm working with Colin Harvey there. You've got to give Colin Harvey credit here. And coming off the back of the double defeat to Liverpool in 86, And, you know, I've said before, you know, when you interviewed Kevin Sheedy the other week, is 86, 87 is a little bit forgotten about. It lives in 84-5 shadow, understandably so. It was sexy, wasn't it, 84, 85, and it was the first title for 14, 15 years. But there was a period midway through the season, 86, 87, when Kevin moved into the middle. And with Alan Harper, because obviously Bracewell was injured, and Reid was injured. And Kevin gave us flair in the middle that we didn't even have in 84, 85. Reid and Bracewell were great, but they're not going to give you flair or imagination with the ball, and Kevin could do that. And it also meant he was on the ball more in the middle of the pitch rather than when he was out wide. And for the period mid-November 86 to probably mid-January 87 is the best. I say in the book it's the best run of games and performances any Everton team in the post-war era has performed at. I think if you have a look at the results, it's like all the games like 3-0, 4-0, 5-1. You know, it's like really big victories, not conceding many goals, but it was the style of play was fantastic. And there was games in that period, 4-0 win at Newcastle in Boxing Day 1986, which was probably the best he ever played under Howard. And Howard liked that because he was in Newcastle, because he was obviously from that part of the world. And a game I actually didn't see because car broke down on the way. Which about to start unfortunately. But that was the best I've seen Everton. And I think it was better in 84, 85 than on the 10 games in October, November, certainly, because we played with more flair and imagination. And there was a run, I think, in the start of the 68-69 season, but it was just fantastic. We were fantastic in that period. And, you know, I think that mainly down to playing Sheedy in the middle. Trevor had a poor season, 85, 86. He was a different player, I think, in 86, 87. And Inchi was also in a great run of form. And it was those three, I think, that made the difference. And but then we start losing again. Kevin got injured. We start losing a few games. And we get to the March, and Liverpool are 9 points clear. Yeah. We had a couple of games in hand, but they're still 9 points clear. Yeah. And you're thinking, they'd gone on a really good run since Christmas. You're thinking, this is just the previous season we visited. And there's a couple of turning points in the season. But one of them is 9 points behind Liverpool playing on the Sunday. Played Charlton at home, and they're talking about that there's a big turning point in that game, at the end of that game, and Liverpool get beat 1-0 at Spurs next day, and the whole season ships. Yeah, you know, from that, and then the following week we crucially win at Arsenal, and when Liverpool get beat at home,
it's a long range one from
Wayne Clark, and then we win at Chelsea the following week, and all of a sudden the 9 points have gone. We're top of the table again in the space for like 2 or 3 weeks. It was such a big turnaround, and then we just drove to the title. It was a great. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a better managerial performance in winning a title than Howard that season, because there's absolutely no way they should have done it. And they won it with 86 points, only 4 less than 84, 85, but they only conceded 31 goals. Yeah, you know, and it's obviously bought Dave Watson in the summer, and Waggy, after the difficult start, became, Ratcliffe and Watson would say, the club's best central defensive partnership. As a partnership, yeah, you wouldn't put them in an all-time 11, but if you were picking the best central defensive partnership, they were great that season. And Neville coming back from injury, Neville was entering his peak years. Yeah, so and I think that's the thing. Forget about 86, 87. Most of the players in the team who played in 84, 85, they were better players in 86, 87. Yeah. Neville was a better player. Kevin Ratcliffe was a more experienced defender. Gary Stevens was a more experienced defender, better. Kevin Sheedy was certainly better. I'd argue that Trevor maybe didn't show his skills as much, but worked harder. He played centre midfield. Of the players who played in both seasons, certainly in goalkeeper, defensive midfield, they were all better players than what they had been 2 years before. I think we lost a little bit up front because Graham had a difficult campaign. He didn't play badly, but didn't score any goals. Yeah, and then Sheedy's form dropped off. But we need to remember that thing about that campaign. Most of the players were better players than what they were 2 years before, and he had to be in truth, to get the title back.
I imagine a huge part of that was the mentality as well. I was just thinking back there, that joint open top bus parade that they had at the end of '86. There's no bigger motivation than having to go on that with Liverpool.
Yeah, and I know Reedy was particularly early because Reedy didn't turn up, did he?
Yeah.
Absolutely. That was a dreadful bit of flat. I think I actually don't know. I don't imagine either both clubs' agreements, but I think it was. But I don't get the impression during the campaign that it affected the players that much. It affected the fans. Yeah, certainly. I think in the early '87, when it looked like Liverpool going to retain the title, I don't think players think like that. Yeah. Maybe one or two. You just play what's in front here, don't you? Really on the day, and we as I say, in many respects, it was compared to years before. I think we reached a higher peak of playing, but it was also a better. I think the numbers end of the season. Scored 86, conceded 31. Yeah. That's like, and I say this in the book, that's scoring 2.5 goals for every goal you concede. In 84-85, we only scored 2 goals for every goal you conceded. Yeah. So it looked far better, the numbers that season. And it was a great campaign and well done. And then, I was going to say, it changes again, doesn't it?
Howard, guess because he'd achieved so much. And as he come to Everton at a very early age, I think he was just shy of his 35th birthday when he came back. Yeah. So he's only like 41 at this point. But off he goes. And like you say, it's an interesting choice because obviously, for those who don't realise, he goes to Athletic Club in Bilbao. This is a club who can't sign overseas players because of their internal policies. They can only sign Basques. Yeah. So it's a very intriguing choice to lose him to them.
It was. And I think the starting point of that, and Howard used to speak about this a lot, didn't he? In the previous March '86, Barcelona got in touch over, and the thinking was Teddy Venables was going to leave as Barcelona manager, and that I talk about this a lot. There's 2 stories here. We thought he was about this Howard sale and what happened a little bit, and Howard said that day off. He went to see them in London. They offered them the job, and that sort of so he's going to Barcelona, and I always thought that there's obviously a link there. And at the same time, Barcelona are also after Lineker, so you put 2 and 2 together, think, well, actually, are they just trying to get using this to Howard so he sells Lineker to us? That the carrot and stick. That means you want to be manager of Barcelona, so we'll sell Lineker to us. And I think there was an element of that with Barcelona. And he got interviewed in London, but he wasn't the only person who got interviewed in London, as I reveal in the book. Okay. Two other big names got interviewed. And Howard, and then to his disappointment, I think because Howard would have gone. Yeah. Venables stays. But then there's a lot about Barcelona and Howard in the book that carried on for when he goes to Spain. I think there's probably... He's offered the job by Barcelona, linked with 4 times. Once when at Bilbao, he was there. I think he was going and then pulled out last minute. But that's by the by. Anyway, so he goes to Bilbao, come calling, and I think his head was turned for a number of reasons. I think he wanted to work abroad. I think the Barcelona thing made him think about working abroad. I don't think it was necessarily to do with the European ban, because Bilbao weren't even in Europe, and he just finished 6th from bottom of the league, the lowest league position. But I think he wants to get back into coaching. That's what he said, and he'd spoken with Atletico Madrid. I think he would have gone to Atletico Madrid if he'd not gone to Bilbao, and he'd also been approached by Juventus, and there'd been talk with Juventus. So there'd been a number of clubs in Madrid had also made an approach in '86. So I think you got a phone call from Bilbao, but I think Bilbao's a great place. The people were great, and I think he was attracted to that. Saying that though, and I think this is the important thing, what he was also attracted to was the salary, because Bilbao were paying him more money got at Everton, but the Spanish tax law is you only pay 22% tax. Okay. So in England you're probably paying 60% tax at the time. So and he's also getting a welcome welcome gift and for joining. So as it was a bit disingenuous, Howard, really, when he said, "Oh, Bilbao only offered what I was getting at Goodison." Well, they did, but actually the tax laws meant that actually you'd have to double your fee. You'd have to double your wages at Goodison to match what Bilbao was saying, and that came into it because I think he would have gone to Barcelona for a drop in salary, but I think the only way he's going to Bilbao is if they give him like a really big financial package just to compensate the fact that they were Bilbao. They were a similar club to Everton in many respects, but they were, and it's just mysterious, isn't it? And
except it's like Everton only signing Scousers or something like that.
It's mysterious in that you are the most sought-after manager in Europe. You've had Juventus trailing you, you've had Real Madrid trailing you, you've had Barcelona trailing you. At that time, twice. I think Benfica were also interested at one stage. And you go to Bilbao.
Yeah.
It's a bit, I say in the book, it's a little bit like 86, 87 Villa, right near the bottom of the first division. Like Bilbao, a historically important club. It's like the manager of like Real Madrid who just won the Spanish title.
Yeah.
Turning up for Aston Villa.
Yeah.
You go, that's a bit crackers, isn't it? And I think for Howard it was that. But the money came into it, certainly. And people say, "Oh no, the European," it may be, but it was a combination of the financial package that he still wanted to coach, and the people were great. I think they just seduced him, and that's fair enough. But it was still. I talk about this a lot in the book. How between 87 and 93, there are a series of very, very surprising moves where you just go, "Howard, why have you done that?"
Right.
And as an Evertonian, I was disappointed in that, and I say that in May '87 we just won the second title of 3 years. Howard talked about, "I've only built the foundations to the club," and then he's within 6 weeks he's going to Bilbao talking about a new challenge. Well, surely the challenge was trying to build an empire like Liverpool.
Yeah,
Howard, that's the challenge, not going to Bilbao. But I also think as well that he knew there was a rebuilding job at Everton.
Okay.
Because if you use 23 players in the season, normally means there's a bit of rebuilding here. Again, going back to us talking about Heysel, think, Everton would have dominated for 3 or 4 years. No, they wouldn't. By 87, they were a team that needed rebuilding. And, for lots of different reasons. And I think he thought, well, if I have this rebuilding job, I could destroy everything I've built over the last 6 years. I could destroy that in 2 years, and I think he thought, well, actually, I'll leave while I'm still the best manager in English football. If it doesn't work in Spain, I'm still going to come back to big offers. And I think that was one of the other reasons he left. So there's lots of stuff, but the European ban is probably the bottom of that list, I think.
Yeah.
Though still maybe influenced them. And then it's an interesting one though, isn't it, then, Chris, is that straight away, Philip Carter offers the job to Colin straight away within days. And that was an interesting one, wasn't it, really? Because I think it was a little bit how Howard's going. So what's going to be best to get the fans back on board a bit? And there was a feeling at the time, as someone who was there, that actually it's not really Howard, it's Colin. Since we come the coaching team, we've kicked on, and so it's going to be it's going to be all good if we get Colin. And I think Philip Carter was, I think, thought that a little bit, and he also thought that they wanted the continuity that they had at Anfield as well. So
we've done a lot of them across the park,
and I think he was seduced by those two factors, and so Colin was an easy choice for him. The problem he was for Carter was, and this is what we don't realise at the time, continuity and promoting within at Anfield work, because the boot room and the management and all sports team, there's 7 or 8 top class coaches and subsequent managers within that. So if you move one on, the core of the boot room is still there. Everton's boot room was just Howard and Colin. Yeah. So if Howard goes, you only got Colin, so it's not really continuity. And then you lose Colin's attributes as a coach, and Colin's coaching team maybe that picked all former Everton players, maybe not the best. And he's in a difficult place, Colin, when he joins, and he's placed Howard, most successful manager in the club's history, and Howard's always won the title. So if you're taking over a side that's just won the title, it's a difficult job, isn't it?
Yeah.
And also made worse the fact that a side that's won the title that needs rebuilding.
Yeah.
And so he was left. Sports has often spoken about this since, haven't they? That he never bought anybody in his first season, didn't he?
And then obviously he spins big after
So it's difficult, isn't it? Because he's in an awkward place, Colin. And to be honest, I've written an enormous amount about Colin's time as manager, even though it was only 3 years, because that it's in some respects when you know yourself, you've done stuff. We've even spoken about it on the podcast. When things are going badly, there's a lot to talk about, isn't it? When things are going successful, it's not as much. But when it's going badly, there's a hell of a lot to talk about. And that was Colin's problem. Is in his first season he made that mistake, but it's easily done, isn't it? Because he had the choice, didn't he? Either bring some players in, and we had a bit of money, so he could have brought some good players in, and then if it doesn't work, you've broken up a championship winning team, haven't you? Yeah. And also as well, you've got to build the level of trust with the players that you've inherited. They'll immediately feel under threat if you bring new players in, won't they? So you've got a choice of doing that or not doing anything and let things drift. And then you're way behind. When you start buying players again, and he chose the latter one, which probably was understandable. But by then Liverpool, Barnes, Beardsley, Aldridge, Houghton, and they've gone. Then in 87, 88, and he never got it back. So I could see why he did it, but that was a mistake, I think, from Colin's side. He was, I think, a more competent manager, but to just replace the players in 87, but he didn't. And I think he was always swimming against the tide from that point on, I think.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, as we speak, actually, we've been talking about this week, he was at Colin's 80th birthday, so many happy returns to him, as we say. He's
a great
the greatest living Evertonian, in the words of Dr. David France. That first season, as Gav mentions there, didn't spend anything, but then the following year, I think that they finished fourth. They consider it the fewest goals in the club's history.
27.
So if we anything like that now, we'd be biting your hand off for that now.
That was the look at the numbers there. Still good numbers, but Liverpool ended up finishing 20 points ahead of us.
Yeah, so like a 20-odd point swing year on year, isn't it?
And that's when the Ratcliffe, Watson, Southall, town that it was at its peak, that campaign. But we finished with 70 points, which fourth, we would have qualified for Europe. It's some reward, isn't it? But because I think that's where the ban affected us and other clubs, to be fair. If you weren't winning titles, you lose a bit of motivation, don't you? And I think that the problem though was that season we only scored 52, I think. So we'd lost 30 goals from the mid-80s, and that's when not having Lineker, not having him a goal scorer here, so Sharpie had stopped scoring. He had a decent season up till Christmas. Asian, his form started to tail off. He lost confidence. We weren't getting any goals from midfield, and the play was a little bit. We gone from 86, 87 playing brilliantly middle of the season, 87, 88. We were a bit bland, I think. And Colin's problem throughout his career, and this as well as manager, which pointed to some of the off-field issues that he had in the late 80s. Our away form was dreadful. I think his 3 years as manager, we only won 12 away games.
Right, yeah.
In the league. And bear in mind, that's what we won in 84, 85 in a single season. In 3 seasons, you're still one of the top clubs in the country, but you'd only win 12 times away from home. Home form as good as anybody. Yeah. I mean, in 87, 88, our home form was nearly as good as Liverpool's. But away form, there was a massive drop-off. And that points to two things, doesn't it? The players don't find, the teamwork and character. And also the fact that actually Colin, I don't think he was a very much you've seen the interviews with Howard's way, like drills, keep the defence stable, stable midfield. Kevin spoke about that, didn't he?
Yeah.
in his interview with you, he was playing a different role. With Colin, maybe a little bit more defensive. That was just Colin's manner. Everybody's got their own style, haven't he? And so consequently, we lacked imagination going up front, and a little bit of quality. And this is where, say, like about Adrian and Graham still playing 87, 88. Been playing on top for us best part of 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
And so everything was stale. Yeah. And I think some of it was that. So there was a number of reasons why it didn't work in his first campaign and going into the second campaign. But not in retrospect, it was, you need to buy, to maintain your standards, you've got to buy at the top. Yeah. And Colin didn't do that, I think, and he paid for that.
Yeah, so what he does after that first year, Devin, he does spend big. Neil McDonald comes in, Stuart McCall, Pat Nevin, and most, obviously, a British record fee, was it at the time?
Tony
Cottee. And you said that there's a lot of resentment there. There's splits in the camp between probably the old guard who were on the lesser money, and even though it's just before the Premier League comes in, the wages have already gone up.
Yeah, the wages went up, and it was an unfortunate timing for Colin in that. In 88, and there was it was the deal eventually that led to the Premier League start. ITV wanted their own deal for televised football. So previously being on BBC and ITV, a lot less games at the moment. I think it's probably like 15, 20 games a season. Yeah. Not a lot compared to 15, 20 games. But they were prepared to pay mega money, 44 million over 4 years, which doesn't sound a lot now, but then it was 6 times more than the previous contract. And heavily weighted because ITV, it's commercial. They were only interested in the big clubs. So the big clubs were on all the time.
It was always the big five, as it were, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that happens in the summer of 88. And so that means that if you're a player coming into a club in the summer of 88, your wages are going to be more. You're going to be looking for more money than what you come in 12 months before, because you're saying, we'll have a bit of that, And that's what happened with Colin. So you had people like... Tony Cottee spoken about his money. He was coming in on money that was 50% more than what, say, Stagnation and Souness had been on at Liverpool 4 years before as the best players in the country. That was that big a difference. Far more money than the existing squad were on. He's won titles, and so there's two things going on there. They're a threat to our places, 13 places, but they're on more money than us, and that's not a great starting point for when players are coming into the dressing room, are they? And I think if John Barnes and Peter Beardsley walked into Everton on them wages, I think it would have all been acceptable, But Pat Nevin was a decent guy and stuff, but he's no John Barnes,
Yeah.
Tony Cottee is no Peter Beardsley, and so I think that resentment that split in the dressing room started pretty much straight away, and that was reflected in performance on the pitch. If you read Pat Nevin's book and stuff, it's quite open about the standoff between the group that had come up in through the 80s and the group that Colin had bought, and that eventually proved damaging. That was worth pointing out, and I mentioned this, and this probably only really came to light when Colin took over. There was also a bit of a split in Howard's team in the mid-80s. In between the players that had come through the reserves under Colin and the players that Howard had brought in.
Okay.
Because the players that Colin had brought through the reserves, they're the ones that stay loyal to him.
Yeah.
When he becomes manager, the players that Howard had brought all go.
Nice.
With him coming in, within a couple of years of him coming in. And I think there was that, there's also a slight split there. That's just my take on things. And that was the narrative then from the Colin's final 2 years.
Yeah.
That performances on the pitch reflected the split within the dressing room. And you know what? You could see either side of the argument, can't you? Because the younger players will say, like, you'll just come in, like, your form's dropped off. Your age and your form's. The older players will say, you're not as good as what we were. And so you're both sort of right. And that discord, I could talk about a few incidences, in the book, but famously manifested itself in the fracas in Frachard and Southport in 1990, I think, between Sheehy and Keown. Yeah.
Catch weight contest. That
yeah,
one.
yeah, it was. There's a few, but that thing, it was just the poor away form was a really great example of that. And not only that, is our poorest performances under Colin tended to be in places like Crystal Palace, Wimbledon, Millwall, places like that who get teams who just make the game purely a physical game. So you've got to really dig in and fight for it, And that's where the worst performance on the Colin, because I don't think the players were up for it as a unit. Maybe as individually they were, and then and I think that was that ultimately proved quite damaging for him as a manager, and he didn't have the experience. Howard would have just rode it out and just sorted it out, but Colin, he wasn't experienced. That was another thing with him. I think coach come to manager is a big jump, isn't it? I say at the start of the book, one of the oldest adage in football, one of them is all managers can coach, but not all coaches can manage. Yeah. And Colin is the prime example of that. And I think when you're a coach, you've got to be tough with players, haven't you? You can be the friend, but you can be tough with them. But when you become a manager, it's a bit of light and shade, isn't it? Yeah. Howard was a master of that, and Colin, he didn't have the light. I think he was still very stern and he wasn't very relaxed, and a lot of players talk about that. Howard's personality. You've been in Howard and Colin's company, and they are two completely different personalities. You can see why Howard's the manager and Colin's the coach straight away. And his man management wasn't great, and that meant he couldn't resolve the issues. And the damaging thing for us then was the players who played in the mid-80s to try and get that dressing room equilibrium back. He ended up giving them big contracts when they were 28, 29, near the end of their careers. And so then our players near the end of their careers on massive money. And, not that we've ever done that since I had Evan, but that there's, things repeat itself. Yeah. That was an example. And ultimately those type of things done for Colin. It was some good, we got the 89 Cup final, didn't we? Yeah. But he failed. He knew he failed, didn't he? Yeah. And there was football and reasons, but I think a lot of things off the path impacted them as well.
Yeah, I just want to mention that before we go on to the end for Colin there, obviously, because it's the closest he came to winning a major trophy. We're not counting the Charity Shield in his first game there. It's not hiding to nothing, but obviously it's just a huge moment for all of Merseyside, really. Obviously, they've been in Hillsborough itself. Everton are 90 miles away at Villa Park, unaware of what's going on. Colin's celebrating getting to his first cup final day, doesn't realise. Then the first competitive game back for Liverpool is at Goodison Park. The goalless derby match midweek, and there's the scarves around Goodison intertwined. And then the final itself, it's a strange one because obviously the barriers have come down there at Wembley. It's very emotional, but I remember people saying very strange day as well.
It was, yeah. Well, Hillsborough was obviously... I was at Villa Park, and that was just awful. But yeah, the game at Wembley, I think a few of the Everton players and said it was strange. As a fan, possibly not. It was the analogy I draw in the book is Bolton playing Man United in the final. After
very similar, yeah.
And like what happened with Bolton is, I think the players, staff knew that actually the entire country wants Liverpool to win here, and we're just a sideshow.
But Bolton won, of course.
Bolton won, but, Bolton Man United is different to Liverpool Everton in 89. And I think there was just a feeling that it was a little bit unfair. Yeah. I know, and there's a piece from David Miller, the esteemed journalist, about that. However, about Heysel and Hillsborough and how Everton were caught up in that, and that sort of, that affected the way people looked at the club and their successes, and there was an element of truth. But I get that. It was all like, Liverpool anthem before the game and stuff. But there's two teams playing here. But at the same time, on the day, that just shows you the gap between the two teams. I know we was 3-2, but Liverpool, compared to 86, which was a 50-50 game, and Liverpool were a far superior team to us. Yeah. And Stuart McCall kept us in it with 2 goals, but you can see the gap the gap there was massive by that time.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's only just over it was the following year, but it's the autumn. Colin goes with Everton in the bottom three, but then he's back. Like I said, the next day you becoming Howard's assistant straight away.
Yeah, I think it was a week different. Maybe 5 days. I think it was probably made the next day, though, to be fair. Yeah. This is a fascinating story, this, isn't it? So Howard's gone to Man City in 89.
Yeah, he's already come back to England.
There's quite a bit about Howard and the England job in 89, 90 to talk about. Because I think one of the things, maybe I think if I wanted to go to Bilbao, I think he thought that the England job comes up.
Yeah.
Got the foreign experience and stuff. And I think he come back, didn't get, and I talk about it in the book, he didn't get the job in 90. Probably because of a Polish shot that hit the crossbar in the last minute in the England's final qualifier. Because if that had gone in, there's no Italian 90, Robson goes, and I think Howard probably would have got the job then.
Right.
Yeah. But he comes back and being to Man City, the famous love affair to whatever it is.
To marriage.
Yeah. And there's a hell of a lot in the book around what happens in the week 6 days between Colin getting sacked and Howard becoming manager.
Okay.
It's fascinating. There's also fascinating. There's a massive name in football who the club probably had a conversation with in 1990.
All right, okay.
Which is also in the book. And he later denied it, but I think there was something there. And so Howard comes back, and it was those are the days when you keep things under wraps. And I remember the day well. Just everybody's expecting. Everybody thought Joe Royle.
I'm going to say, obviously he comes forward.
Yeah, and Howard walks into the suite at Goodison and he's with Colin. But that was quite an interesting.
Imagine that's now a different manager to
Yeah. And so there's quite a bit in the book about what happened in those 6 days. Not necessarily reflecting published accounts, shall we say, from people who were with Howard during that time. And that's quite an interesting little passage. And then I think there was two saying at the front of the book, they knew that old adage about footballers never go back.
Yeah.
And Howard got told by friends, don't go back to back. Because City had a really good team, and you could see where they were coming. They had a lot of good young players. Don't go back, Howard, And then that was made worse by the fact that I think the logic is there's a bit of a split in the dressing room. So you bring Colin back, who's probably caused it, and he's fallen out with quite a few players, and now he's the coach. So it didn't make any sense. And but they were like Carter was used by the cult of continuity in 87. The board and Carter were still there, which is used by the fact the two are back. It'd be like it was before, but in those 3 years, football had changed. And there's a wider piece in the book about how football changed from when they're talking about the Big Five, and then the start of they talked about the Premier League in the late 80s, early 90s, Sky TV, all that. And football had changed in that time. In the mid 80s, he only had to beat Liverpool. By the time Howard comes back in 90, we got Arsenal winning league titles. Ferguson started to work his back at Magic United. Leeds have come back in, threatening. Within a year of Howard coming back, Jack Walker and Kenny Dalglish are at Blackburn, John Hall's employing Kevin Keegan with money at Newcastle. Completely different landscape of football to what it was in the mid 80s, and so it was never going to just be the same. And Howard had changed. Howard had been a manager for more than 10 years. Colin was obviously affected by his coach, his management failing, and the relationship between the two. I think Colin said, "I changed, Howard had changed." As you would over a number of years. So it was never going to come back. It was not going to be May 87 in November 1990. It was never going to be like that. And it was a massive mistake by the board, I think. An understandable one. But I think Joe would have been the better appointment in 90. Yeah, absolutely. Because I tell you why. I think Joe would have been a better appointment that's in 90 than 94.
Okay.
To be fair. Because I think when he comes in 94, and that's probably the next book, is he'd had baggage at Oldham in that time. He'd been in the Premier League. The club had a lot more baggage in 94 compared to 90. I think Royal coming in 90, he was a relatively inexperienced manager. He'd done really well at Oldham. And I think he would have grown into the management job at Everton in the same way that Moyes did.
Right,
He'd come from Preston. Who'd done a few years at Preston, established himself as a good championship manager, third or fourth, a bit like Joe. And I think they would have just grown. I think Joe would have grown into the job from 90, like Moyes did.
Yeah.
I think when Joe came at 94, he may have been 4 years too late. He did win a trophy. And I think Joe would have been, Howard still had peripheral dressing room issues and stuff on his own, as we know, his own behaviour, shall we say, which you do touch upon. And I think Joe would have smoothed things over. I think he had that personality and charisma just to have, resolved all them dressing room issues were there. And I think Joe would have been a far better appointment than Howard in 90. But they were just, as soon as Howard expressed an interest, the board were always going to go on appointment. The one thing is, though, I didn't know till the board brought Howard back, they didn't know that he was going to appoint Colin.
Okay.
And I don't think the board were too happy.
But once you got Howard in, what are you going to say? Yeah.
I think they just thought Howard's coming back. They didn't know that. So, by the way, Colin's coming.
Yeah.
And I think that probably, I think it was never going to work.
Well, at this point, they're still trying to act like a big club. Obviously, Philip Carter's one of the leading lights in creating the Premier League, and he was the president of the Football League or whatever he was at the time. So it's very much one of the architects of that. But Howard, first summer back, he tries to bring Dean Saunders in for a record fee. Obviously, he ends up going to Liverpool, which means that Peter Beardsley crosses the park, and then he sort of repeats the mistake, though, because he has 2 good years out of him, sort of drops off on the second year, and he lets him go to Newcastle as a Indian summer then. But like we said at the start, the Premier League is sort of a continuation of the old First Division at this time. Everton got very few overseas players at this time. It's still an all-white squad at Everton as well. So
I do talk about that. I think that's important because there's a few bits someone picked from that. I did talk about Philip Carter a lot in the book, about he was Everton chairman under his glory days. He appointed Howard, but by the late 80s, Carter had done a lot of work with the television companies and stuff like that. He's got wider ambitions within the game, and I do think that he took his eye off the ball with Everton. Mm-hmm. He had a close relationship with Howard. I'm not sure he had a close relationship with Colin. His departing words when Colin left are quite terse,
right?
And he could be publicly critical of Colin in writing in the club's annual report in 1990, which would never have done in Howard in the early 80s. You see what he said in the annual report in 1990 compared to what he'd written about Colin in the Daily about Colin. Sorry, start again. What he wrote about Colin in the annual report in 1990 compared to what he wrote in the Daily Express in 1983 about Howard are 2 completely different things. And I think he took his eye off the ball. He ends up getting sacked as Football League president. And he said when he gets sacked, to talk about, he says, I'll have to go back to the job of watching Everton now. Well, that is your job, mate. The Football League presidency is just an add-on to that. Your core job is Everton chairman, and he took his eye off the ball. I think he had wider ambitions in the game, maybe to mask that the fact that I think he maybe didn't fulfil his potential at Littlewoods. And so he's quite interesting. And Carter's role, and then Carter goes and David Marsh comes in 91. And as you say, Chris, the game is changing. Finances in the game are changing. You've got the Premier League on the horizon. You've got foreign players, and all this is why why it goes wrong after 87. And one of the things is this thing about Everton being a Big 5 club. Yeah. Well, we're not. We were in the mid-80s purely because we were successful in the mid-80s, out of happenstance more than anything else. And there's been several Big 5s over the years. The first Big 5 in the 60s had Bolton and Burnley in. Right. And in the late 70s, they had Nottingham Forest and Ipswich in. In the mid-80s, we're included with the North London rivals, Liverpool and Man United, purely because of winning stuff, and we're getting a bit extra money, big gates. But what we haven't got, and this is the key, what happens in the decades in the early 90s is, even by then, we haven't got Liverpool, Man United's international national support.
Yeah.
You know, the wide range and support. So they could, whether they're rubbish or not, they will always get big gates. And what we haven't got is Tottenham's and Arsenal's, dare I say, rich fans, and being in London.
Yeah.
Their access to sponsorship and commercial revenues that you haven't got in Liverpool, which is, what was it called, the Bermuda Triangle of capitalism in the early 80s. We've got neither of them.
Yeah.
And most clubs now at the top have got both. And so we've got neither. So as revenues are growing in English football at the end of the 80s, early 90s, through bigger attendances, TV money and stuff like that, it's mostly attendances are going up, and that's how Everton. Our attendances are going down.
It's incredible now.
Yeah.
That's sub 20,000 gates.
In the early 90s. It's the same as what it was in the early 80s.
Yeah.
But in 92, 93, we averaged 20,000. Liverpool, who'd had a really poor season, I was going to average 40.
Yeah.
And that was at a time when clubs still got most of their money from the gate.
Yeah.
And so we're within £1 million revenue, maybe 5 million to Liverpool, 6 million in the mid-80s. By the early 90s, we're on probably 9. They're on 15, 16, 17 million. And United and Arsenal even more, purely because they've got big attendances. People pay more money. Most people are sitting by then because of the Taylor report. And so we're heading in the opposite direction. I mean, I think 91, 92, we got a few smaller attendances at Goodison than what Nottingham Forest got, or Sheffield United got.
Wow.
Because the mid-80s masked a lot of stuff. Everton fans would only watch a winning team. And by the early 90s, they've gone back to the early 80s attendances of 20,000. But our rivals got 40.
Yeah.
You know, I'd say in the book, in the early 90s, we'd need to have, if Tottenham and Arsenal had 5, for every 5 home gates, the revenue we got, Tottenham and Arsenal got the same revenue in 3.
Yeah.
And they were filling their stadiums.
And this is 30 years.
Yeah. And the same now. They were filling their stadium. I mean, ours were only half full, so you can see them. That's why the gap's going. The Premier League didn't grow. Start the gap. The gap has started because of the way gates shifted between the mid-80s and early 90s. And the Premier League didn't change a lot, really, in terms of money. You know, the overall TV money for the Premier League in the first year was 35 million quid. Yeah. What is it now, 1.5 billion or whatever it is, yeah. I mean, Man United only got 2 million quid for winning the Premier League in 92, 93. Yeah. You know, so it was there, but we were struggling going back to the original point about Saunders. We offered the money, boys, going to Liverpool. Yeah. Because they've got 40,000 crowds. Yeah. We've only got 20. The game was changing. Howard, in the glory years, Howard never have to sell the club like he tried to sell Dean Saunders. Gary Lineker just came to Everton. So tried to sell the club, but Saunders ended up going to Liverpool, didn't he? And that was a sign then. That was probably the last time we probably decided to buy the most expensive player around. Yeah, I think.
And I touched on it before, actually. So that final season that you're covering now, 93, 94, Howard ends up going into December, and it's because the club don't back him to sign Dion Dublin.
Oh, I don't know about that. I talk about that a lot.
Okay.
This whole bit, I'm not sure. I think there was Dion Dublin came into it, but what I should be about being unkind on Howard is the general story reported is not necessarily reflective of the facts, and I talk about that quite a bit. I think there was reasons. I think that Dublin came into it, but I think it masked other reasons. I think one of them being is Graham Taylor had just been sacked as England manager, and I think that Howard, I say, didn't get the job in 90 because Peter Swells was his chairman. Peter Swells was also deputy head of the England, the team,
with the committee or whatever it was,
in the FA. So he had a vested interest in not giving the job to Howard.
Yeah, it was, getting his own manager.
I think he knew that, yeah. And I think Howard knew that he had the better job of getting the England job if you didn't have a club. I speculate on that.
Okay.
I think that was one. And there were several other reasons as well. And it was obviously football reasons. And I think how the game had changed in that money gives players power, doesn't it? And I think the players to be fair to Howard, the players he was dealing with in the early 90s were different to what the players were in the early 80s. They're on more money. And money changes your attitudes, doesn't it? And I think Howard couldn't understand why you tell players to do stuff and he wouldn't do it. You know, Graham Souness went to Liverpool at the same time, didn't he, as Howard? And he'd obviously played like Howard for the club, and Souness said the same, that at Liverpool, the players in the early 90s, they weren't like they were in the early 80s. Okay. And he said that Ronnie Whelan, because Ronnie Whelan was at the same time, said that the difference is now the money changing. And I think Howard had the same experience. That you know, die-hard thing they had in the early mid-80s. I don't think players had that. I think he had to manage them differently. And some of his man management that consequently that worked in the early mid-80s, not working in the early 90s, you know, or going down the pub and, you know, using drink as a bonding session. By the early 90s, society was changing, and I think that didn't work, and I think Howard was struggling on that, and I think he knew that maybe his time was up. I think Colin Harvey said, didn't he, that he did aware that Howard was going to get sacked anyway. Yeah, and you've also got, and that's it. This is the really big bit at the end of the book. Is well, there's two big bits. Then the first bit is the Moore's dies, and so the club is effectively up for sale. Yeah,
the grand old man, finally well into his 90s, just passed away.
The same weekend we got beat 5-1 at home to Norwich,
right?
Who were in the third division when Moores took over in 60. You know, so it just shows you how things change. And so then you got the Bill Kenwright consortium, and you got Peter Johnson from Tranmere. And I think Howard thought that he thought that Johnson's going to come in and I'm going to get sacked anyway, so I may as well resign and he got it as mutual consent. Yeah. So I think there's that aspect to it as well. But there's lots of other things going on. The Dale Dublin story is a really interesting thing about how stories gather momentum over time and then become, but when you actually look back at and the facts at the time, which I was doing these books, not so sure about that. And Howard, I think he saw the writing on the wall a little bit. So he resigns, doesn't he, after the Southampton game. And then you've got this, you know, Bill Kenwright's consortium on the club, Peter Johnson wants the club, and the board can't really decide, and then it just goes on, you know. So they appoint Mike Walker, and that's a really interesting discussion I have over who actually wants it. Mike Walker, or is it just to satisfy the board? Because at this point, the takeover battle hasn't been completed. Was it there to satisfy the board, the Kenwright consortium, the Peter Johnson consortium? Was it just to satisfy all three parties? Nobody's really selecting the manager. Is it just to like a neutral choice? And you know, then Walker comes in. I mean, we know what happens, don't we? He has a few. There's a great line of first impression, all that. Ian Hargraves of this paddock wrote a piece. I mean, we start off really well. We had to run the home games. We won a few of them.
Swindon 6-2, wasn't it? Out of Whipping Boys.
And Ian Hargraves said, I've really seen somebody come into Merseyside and establish themselves as a great football, you know, football. It's something like that, you know. And within a couple of months, that's probably what was the feeling at the time. Within a couple of months, it's obviously not the case. That Walker come from Norwich, and he was critical of Howard, which I think was a bit unfair. And he said, like the first, what he always said in the podcast, what's the first thing a manager always says when they come in? The players are unfit. And he said that he ticked all the boxes. Right. The criticisms of the previous regime. And we get to that point, don't we, that we're safe, you know, in the March, and we go on this around.
I don't think they've been in the relegation zone until the penultimate weekend of the season or something.
Yeah, I think the 93-94 is, and I remember said this last season, but there's lots of comparisons with last season and 93-94. Like we had the takeover battle last season, we've got a battle against the drop. There's all sorts of uncertainty surrounding the club, and that was a bit like in 93-94. Thankfully, we managed to get ourselves out, you know, relatively comfortably last season. But there's lots of similarities. Whether Dice wants to be compared to Mike Walker, no, you can tell him that. Yeah. And I think Walker, I think he's just been told just keep us in a holding pattern because by the ownership, again, history repeats itself. You know, Bob got the ownership sorted. We've heard that before this series, haven't we? And I think that, again, we've spoken about this on the pod, that history repeats itself. The problem with that, you become a little bit complacent.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden things start to drift, and before you know it, it's like you're playing losing altitude and you can't really, get it back up in the air. And I think that happened to us. So by the time you get to April '94, like at the right near the drop zone, and then we fall into it with a couple of games left, and we have that bad defeat. I don't know, at Leeds we got beat 3-0 on the penultimate game, and you think we've got a home game against Wimbledon. Yeah. And we're in the bottom 3, and it doesn't matter if we beat Wimbledon. If results go against us from the teams above us, we're still going down. So it's a little bit out of our control. And I talk a lot about the Wimbledon game, for lots of reasons. The game itself, but it's just this thing about like how the Mersey Millionaires are now, like, you got Wimbledon, a club that was in the Football League when Everton, but the 60s.
But they were a good side. I think they were 6th that season.
Yeah. I mean, say that. Yeah, I looked at it as part of the research, and
because you're off paintballing on the day.
There you go. Yeah, I say if you have a look at the Wimbledon team that day, the only person getting in the Wimbledon team, obviously the Everton team, is in Southall.
Yeah,
because they had some great. I mean, there wasn't like the crazy gang hoofball like they had in the mid '80s. They had like a lot of really good players, Walker, John Scales was playing centre half. Walker tried to sign him in the March transfer window.
Right, but when it went, because he went and got Lineker and
went
Joe
to Liverpool
Parks.
that summer. Yeah, Warren Barton, Dean Oldsworth, really good striker. Robbie Earl, one of the best box-to-box goal-scoring midfielders in the Premier League. Marcus Gale was playing for him. He's a favourite. Really good, clever players.
Didn't even have Flash New that day. He was on the side.
Yeah. Oh, we talk about that as well. And and you're looking at their team, and like Kinnear has won the Manager of the Month in March and April, and so they're playing us to get them. The cards are stacked against us.
Wasn't something where the owner Sam, my man, was going to take him to Vegas or something like that?
For them and the family. So if they won, they went 5th.
Yeah,
and there was like, we all know the game. We don't have to talk about the game. And we stay up, but it's you've spoken to Anders Limpard about it, so you're probably more familiar than me.
But it's just trying to relay it after Ian and I were both there that day. Ian's off camera at the moment, but to try and sort of talk to teenagers, to young people about this now. The facts, you don't know what's going on elsewhere. Like you say, a win is not necessarily enough for Everton. So it's a big pitch invasion at the end. Roy the Rovers stuff, they've come from 2-0 down, win 3-2. Everyone's on the pitch, and they don't know if they don't know if that's enough.
Yeah, because most of the afternoon we were still in the drop zone because Sheffield United were above us. They were winning. Southampton win at West Ham. Ipswich were drawing. So there was a possibility that even if we win, we won't stay up. And she said, you see everybody run off celebrating, but actually they didn't know that till afterwards. What had happened as it happened, Sheffield United went down.
And they did duff information. I remember covering this myself. They, again, because the communications are bad, they think they have to push for a goal at Stamford Bridge when a draw would have actually been enough for them. So they get caught in the counter, and Mark Stein scores in the last minute for them.
Yeah. And it was a pointless fact he was born on the same day as me, Mark Stein. And it was relief, wasn't it? There was a little bit of novelty value, I think, of that game that wasn't there in '98, I think. And we stay up, and then obviously, and I'm obliged to talk about the court case. As mentioned in the court case with Hans Segers, which I talk about a lot. And in the aftermath of it, because the two things it was quite a strange game, wasn't it, really, anyway, because we had the park, it was a bit surreal for lots of reasons. Everton couldn't go down. There's no park end, is there?
There's people watching in trees in Stanley Park.
The Wimbledon coach had been taught, hasn't it, in Warrington.
A hot reception.
Yeah. And we got, so there's just quite a few strange things knocking around in the game. And we end up surviving, really, in Barry Horn. He scored for the world. That was his first goal for Everton. I think
since his debut.
Yeah. What a time to score it. And it was a strange one. We got over the line, But and I was saying, this can never happen again. And then what happens, at the same time is which you don't really cover. That's for the next one. For is Peter Johnson in to take over battle because Moore's son changed. His daughters switch horses.
Yeah,
from the Kenwright consortium to the Johnson consortium was offering more money, and but that's for another day.
Yeah,
and then I end the book really on looking back over Moore's 34 years at Everton and explaining, like, putting that in the context of the modern day, largely, why we are where we are now because of what happened in that period. And he was talking on the pod with me the other week. It starts off, Moore's comes into Everton because he sees the future of football, which is in the 50s, European football started to take off, TV become involved. He just sees them two things. And he thinks the looks at the horizon, I think they're just filled with gold, and he saw the business opportunity there. And he's a big football fan as well. And a quote, I think said on the pod the other week, there's a quote of the Super League will be starting in the ECHO. Barcelona will be in it, Real Madrid will be in it. It's just a question of who else will be in it. And that's from June 1960.
Yeah.
That's just mad, isn't it? It just shows you how things repeat itself. And I talk about Moore's legacy, how his force for good in the 60s, he then becomes... I'd say that if you got all the money and all the power, the one thing, the resource that you run out of is time. And I think that happened for Moore's in the early 70s. I think he can only operate in that pressurised environment for a period at a time. And he did for Harry Catterick. And then he makes a series of bad decisions. Billy Bingham was a bad decision. We end up employing people that are on the, 2 or 3 levels below where you want to point, and people don't want the job because the independent managers who are own people, they don't want to answer to Moore's, they just want to answer to themselves. So that's why you got that's why the likes of Ron Saunders wouldn't go near Evan, Bobby Robson wouldn't go near him.
Okay.
But he gets lucky with Kendall, doesn't he? Which was a bit of a risk. Well, not Moore's, but Carter do, Everton do. But then there's a series of bad management appointments then, and I talk about the culture of the club in that time, even going back to the 60s, and it's still relevant today, I think, is there's an insularity about Everton that was established in the 60s that's never really left the club. And there are certain times where the club has just gone for, let's appoint an Evertonian, go with the side and trusted. Yeah. When actually sometimes you want somebody from the outside coming in to challenge, and I think we've been very insular and don't really like that. As a fan base, we always said, "Oh, well, it's a good Evertonian," or talks about the club well, but actually you don't want that a lot of the time. As a club, we've been even in the Moore's time, we've been guilty of that. It's a bit like Colin coming in '87. Who does you point on as coaching staff? Teddy Darracott, Mick Lyons, Peter Reid, all former players. When really, well, the obvious Colin, the other choice, Don Howe's free. Go and get Don Howe, come in. He has a sounding board for you. He knows the players, get him, but he goes with the side and trusted Evans. Fans are like that. Well, actually, you're not going to do anything if that's what. And I think you do that. I think that's permeated through quite a few club decisions over the years. Yeah. When you want somebody from the outside to come in and challenge, and I speak about that in the end bit. There's quite a long chapter, a long read, it's called these days, about Moore's at Everton and the impact on the club and the culture that's still here to this day, I think. Yeah.
So this is the end of the end. Thanks for Gavin for coming in. Obviously, Christmas is round the corner, so if you want to get your hands on that, we're going to include details on the link, so I'll can get hold of that. Obviously, that follows his previous books, Money Can't Buy Love and Boys from the Blue stuff. So yeah, the further that holy trinity of books from Gav.
Oh, I like it. Yeah, I like it.
The end is coming out soon. So thanks, Gav, and we'll be with you soon for more talk on the Blues.
The Royal Blue Podcast from the Liverpool ECHO.